on a wee second, I'll put the stick in the bag. Okay, thank you. Just watch your head to the way out, please.
Ja, raadje, dat mag als een shock bij je.
I have no idea. I don't know if they took the library show. Bye-bye. Bye now. Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you, head. Thank you. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
We've got to do the back gate, Tony.
Here they're coming. Down there, look.
Oh, well, nice to see you, gentlemen.
It's me. It's a long time. Oh, yeah. Come on. Come and see Peter.
Hello, Angus.
Hello.
How are you?
Lovely to see
That's
you.
a long time, isn't it?
Long
Eh?
time.
You look very well.
Yes.
Very well indeed.
Yes, remarkably well for my age,
Yeah.
you know.
You are, you're not bad. Now these two I have to remember.
Derek Cutcliffe.
You're Derek Cutcliffe.
43 years.
Right,
Is it?
not-
No,
it's
49.
Not
40
longer than that.
48 years.
Yeah.
And
In
John
the Royal
Lester,
Island.
John
Peter.
Lester.
I was 17 when I last met you. I'm
Yes,
67
if I come
now.
back to you a bit, come along a bit later on. I think.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Amazing.
You were a cadet.
I
at
was
the
a
time.
cadet, yes.
Yeah.
In the boat with you and,
And
Derek.
you were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And then we sailed together subsequently in the Royal Island from Belfast.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, so you were there when I did my bit of rebellion in Cardiff when I left the ship. You won't remember it, perhaps.
Quite unbelievable.
Because we couldn't get shore leave,
Oh, is that what it was?
and I refused to sign on unless we did, because it didn't matter to me like it did to the regular people. Yeah. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
You
Good.
can't remember any of us, really.
Not really.
No.
No.
Not really.
No.
You,
I will do. I
you
can
probably
remember-
will if you when
tell
you
you what
haven't-
tell you what I will be able to remember from when we had this lifeboat thing, because I can still vaguely remember the people who were sitting where in the lifeboat, and I think I, remember a bit of that.
Yeah.
Have you got a photograph?
I've got the enlarged version of the one I think one of you
Yeah.
got.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
It's enlarged. Anyway, it'll be interesting. to
We shall find out a bit
Yes,
more about
yes,
everything, I
yes,
expect. Yes.
see. Yeah.
Jolly good.
It'll come back.
Yes.
It's
yes,
remarkable
indeed.
how it does. And this is your wife?
This is my wife Anne.
Hello. Derek Cutcliffe.
Derek.
Hello, and John Lester.
John Lester. And you've met. I'm sorry, I haven't said hello to Rhoda.
Nice to see you, Peter.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Nice to see
Lovely.
you. Yeah, take care.
You're all right, my
Very
love?
well.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you.
I'm very well.
Good, good,
Yes.
good, good.
I haven't been. I've been poorly, but I'm very well.
You're
yeah.
very well.
Very well. Yes.
Well, look at you doing.
Yes. I've got some nice lunch for everyone.
That's fine.
Lovely.
You're a kind girl. Very kind of you.
Your flight on time?
Yes, the last... We've been in 3.
What's happened to the luggage? Got
Got left
behind
on the
time?
way.
Oh,
Got
dear.
dropped on the way. They've promised they will deliver it
On you go.
this afternoon, they say.
Ah,
Because we've got prezzies and things.
Yeah.
That's that.
Just look at me. And I'll just talk to you and you smile. It's I mean, I know it's difficult to pretend that you haven't seen me for 48 years, because 48 years I wasn't actually around, but 42 years I was around, but I wasn't saying very much.
Oh, well, nice meeting you.
It's good to see you again.
Great, yeah.
We've got some decent...
It's all a big fake, isn't it?
No,
Yeah,
it's,
it's all right,
it's,
yeah,
it's
well,
like pleasure.
It'll all appear to be wonderful.
It's a pleasure to meet them and
Yes.
to see them. And
Would you have remembered Peter Franklin Day?
oh yes,
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 yes, yes.
Yeah.
I can't remember
Just keep
seeing him.
away,
Were you around then?
No.
No,
This
that's
is a
a-
film crew. This is
That's right.
this is just all a big
You
fake.
just look at me, yes, this is... Oh dear, I don't know. What a way to make a living, eh?
Angus.
to-
Yes. Angus.
Sorry, oh, right, okay.
Okay, Tony, let's roll.
Angus, it's lovely to be here and to see you again after all these years.
Yeah.
I think we all think that. And it's lovely to see you looking so well and so fit. And you wouldn't have thought that you'd gone through anything all those years ago.
Yes, Angus, it was lovely to see you. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
Sorry. Okay, go on. Sorry, I thought you were going to...
Yeah.
No,
Don't worry.
we can ignore us.
Don't worry. We follow your conversation.
We'll follow that, yes.
Okay, so...
Just forget it.
It's a few minutes ago.
Yes, Angus, it was lovely to see you down at my home 2 years ago, and to be here now is just the ice on the gingerbread, if you whatever you call it. It's really, really lovely. And you've been also kind to us again.
Who's got a clear memory of the day it happened?
we all got our own clear memories of it, but oddly enough, not all of them coincide. Some things they do. Peter's just talked about one of the lads who was very severely burnt, and I can remember him coming up onto the boat deck through the door in the funnel, the fiddly, and he was terribly badly burnt. And that was something that I hadn't thought about for a long time. Peter just mentioned
That's
it.
right. You knew he wasn't going to live.
Yeah, you could see that he wasn't
see
going
that
to.
he couldn't possibly live. That's right. But he was in another boat. Yeah. You remember very clearly, Angus, don't you? The morning of the day we were torpedoed. You remember the torpedoing and going down into that boat which overturned.
How much of it do you remember?
Oh, well, there's parts of it that I'm sort of lost.
Yes.
But the time of the torpedoing and that, I could follow that, almost up to... Till it got very rough, you see,
Yes.
when it did.
Did you have to swim
No.
to the boat?
No, because I was quite able to swim. That's one of my great things that I can do anywhere.
Yeah.
To jump in.
Do you think that was to your advantage that you made it to the boat? The fact that you were able to swim.
Oh yes, indeed.
Yes.
Oh,
And then
yes,
when you got to the boat, what was it? Wasn't it not overturned?
Yes, after a good while. But
Yes. And what did you have to do? Can you remember?
Well,
You got a rat in the water, didn't you?
oh yes, that's right. Yes, with the help of others as well.
Yes.
as,
Well, all these others are with you in this room
yes,
today.
yeah,
4 of them are here. 3 of them are with you here
yeah.
today.
those that were in the boat.
Yeah. How do you feel having them with you? How do you feel today having them
Oh, it's
with you?
great. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Aye, and it's a thing you'd never expect to happen, but
Yeah.
still it does happen.
Yes, and 50 years nearly to the day that three of them are with you here
Yes,
in
aye.
Shawbus.
Aye. Oh well, very nice to be.
And three of us
See,
haven't seen each other for 50 years.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
It's wonderful
Yes.
when you come to think of the way the Lord has brought us either to the experience that we all had. It's really wonderful.
What goes through people's minds when they realise they've been hit by a torpedo?
Well, I was on the bridge at the time, and the first thing I can remember is seeing this. I was keeping lookout actually, and on the bridge, portwing the bridge, and I can remember this green wall of water in front of me, and I heard this terrific. It was a sort of thud, and it took some seconds, I suppose, for it to sink in, and then all this water came cascading down on one, and you realise what had happened. And my first thoughts was, I haven't got a life jacket. I went down below to my cabin to get that, but by that time the ship was over at about 30 degrees. And I thought, well, it's better to get up to the lifeboat, which I did. And this was getting the port lifeboat away. By that time the boat deck was very nearly in the water, and on the starboard side, whereas on our side of the boat, it was like walking down Brighton Beach into the we sort of walked down, and the difficulty was getting past the main deck. You were on the boat deck, and you had this cavity which was the main deck space, which you had to walk across actually the stanchions to get down onto the hull of the ship. Then I just remember walking down the side of the ship into the lifeboat, into the sea, which was covered because the lifeboat wasn't there. I forget, it was turned over. I can't quite remember.
They pushed it away, yes.
They'd pushed it away. The sea was covered with this granulated cork from the refrigeration in the holes, and one had and oil mixed with heavy fuel oil, and one was taking mouthfuls of this stuff in because as the waves splashed up in your face. And I suppose my next thought was, I've never swum in 2,000 fathoms before. I'm used to swimming in about 5 feet. And then you got to the boat, and there she was. Every time a swell came along, we got into the shape of the boat. We were sort of sat in the shape of the boat, from my memory. Every time a swell came along, you lost the boat, and you were sort of treading water, and the boat was below you. And then as the swell passed, the boat would lift a bit, and then I think she turned over. Someone else could probably take over from there. But that was my memories of.
Yes, for people who wouldn't know the sea, of course, it wouldn't sink because it was full of buoyancy tanks.
Yeah.
But the guns of the boat were more or less underwater. And then one of the other boats came alongside, and we moved to one side to get on board the other boat. And of course, doing that, the whole thing went right over and tipped over on its keel. And that's, as Angus said, we then had this problem of righting the boat, which you do by getting on the keel and hanging on to the ropes going around it, swinging backwards and forwards, which is extremely difficult with a heavy lifeboat. And it took a long time with about 6 or 8 of us on the keel. Eventually we turned it over, then started to bail it out, and gradually more people came back and joined this boat, and finally we bailed it out. But I think the others would bear with me that by then it had lost the oars, the mast, the sails, and all the water.
Yeah,
I think
water breakers are gone.
The water breakers had gone as well. And there we were with a lifeboat with very little in it. And we picked up 2 or 3 oars, or 2, 3 or 4 oars from the sea.
Yes.
And we found a raft which had a breaker, which is a 10-gallon drum, I think. And we managed to get that on board, and that was the extent of what we had to use for sailing the thing. That was that part of it. We'd lost everything. I was supposed to have lured the radio into the lifeboat, emergency radio from the boat deck, and of course when the boat turned over that went as well, so we lost the lifeboat transmitter as well. And that's about all for that bit of the story from me.
Well, as well as the bits and pieces that you mentioned that we picked up, I remember we got a canvas off a potato locker, which later proved quite useful because we were able to get a little bit of shelter from it. There were plug hatches floating about, and on one of those there was a case of tongue.
That's right, yes.
Tongue or bully beef, one or two. Tongue, I think it was.
Yes, yes.
And we got that off, but we weren't able to eat that for very long. In fact, we got 2 canisters from the last. We later on managed to pinch another one. But that was a bit smaller. But that was the total water that we had for the whole 18 of us, who eventually went with the boat.
Did you know what had hit you?
Yes. Yeah. I was down in the cabin. I'd just come off the bridge, went down in the cabin, and the second it hit, you knew what it was. There was no mistaking it. Tremendous shudder the boat came. And but the reaction, silly things that you thought of doing, I went into my wardrobe and took a pair of silk stockings that I bought from a girlfriend in the Argentine and stuck them in my pocket. And as a matter of fact, I wore them for a while in the boat because all I had on was a pair of shorts and a shirt and a little sleeveless pullover. And at least it kept my legs a bit warm. But of course there was a certain amount of leg pulling over that one. But I think the fact that we, in the main, volunteered to go back in that boat, and so that we were younger men and fitter men, and men with perhaps a little bit more drive and will to survive, and it was that got us through, because we were, by a long way, the least well equipped to have come out of it successfully, and in fact we came out of it the best of the lot in the end.
What happened to the other boats?
One of them was picked up on the same day as ourselves, but miles away, within an hour. I think they had about 3 chaps died, and one of the other boats was picked up after 6 days, and they had 6 go. And it was mainly through what we would now call hypothermia, I suppose, exposure and fatigue. And I think if we'd had any much longer, we'd have started to have people going as well. We were just about at the end of our tether and still all staying together. 1 or 2 of the chaps were just beginning to show the signs that was getting on top of them. I mean, it's a wonder we got as far as we did and all survived as well as we did. But there's a limit to what you can stand under those conditions.
I think it was on the Sunday when the gale started. We had this very fierce gale on the Sunday when Angus actually came into his own, and we had no rudder from my memory. We had a steering oar. I don't think we had a rudder as such, and I think Angus took the steering oar.
We did have a rudder.
We did, but Angus Enright took the helm, and he at that time, I can remember seeing these seas, which I think were 40 foot. They must have been 30 to 40 foot, green and
That's right.
curling at the top, and they were. You could see these things coming, or this one coming really, because that was the horizon, this sea. And I thought that we should never get through this, and my memory is of Angus sitting there, calm and very quiet. And he at that time, I'm sorry about this, but I remember it very vividly. Saved a lot of us. I'm sure of it. It hadn't been practiced.
He saved our life.
He did.
No doubt.
It's a memory I shall never forget. Thank you, Angus.
Oh.
Can we ask him this question, Tony? I'll ask him from over here. kept some of the younger men in the boat said that you helped to keep them going. What kept you going, Angus?
Well, there was one of the things that kept me going in all the difficulties was what happened in my life internally, spiritually, what took place in my life. That was my mainstay. And for the sailing of the boat and that, making our way amongst heavy seas and that, we got on wonderfully well. And nothing happened that could be in our way. We really made the other side of it. But that was the main. And above all, there was a conversion took place in my life at sea shortly before then. And all these things that did happen in my life was really great, you know. You had something to go back and remember the way that the Lord has brought us hitherto. And I covered all my saving on what the Lord did for myself and for the rest. It was really wonderful.
In one of the articles that was written about you, you quoted a psalm. Do you remember that psalm about going down to the sea in ships? Do you remember that psalm?
Well, I can't get a hold of it just now. But, have you got a part of it?
Psalm 107. Who knows Psalm 107?
Oh yes, there you are. Yes, I.
So it was faith.
Oh, it's faith, yes, indeed. Yes, and another thing that I was relying on, and I was a good swimmer. And it didn't hurt me in any way to jump into the sea or to save my life and that. I was an excellent swimmer. I mean, all my life, from the time I started swimming as a little boy. And I found it so useful that really I could recommend for everyone to learn swimming, because you never know when you had to make an effort that way. And I had no difficulty in sailing the boat until we were landed quite safely on the other side.
Why was it easy for you to sail that small boat?
Huh?
Why was it easy for you to sail that small
Well,
boat?
of course I had the knowledge of how to sail and how to see that gives you confidence on that. And you know what you're doing and what can you do. So it's really wonderful.
Did you not get a lot of experience with an uncle when you went?
Oh yes, of course, that uncle, I used to go out fishing with him, you know, lobster fishing. And he used to direct me and tell me, you see, well, he would say, he was just like a conductor, you know. He would say, no, when you're in a situation like this is what you do. And I was taught by him lots of things that will become very, very useful to me in the North Atlantic. Because he had a great experience himself. He's an old uncle of mine.
You managed to work the boat how? You made something which was very useful. What did you make?
Oh, well, we made a sail, you see. We had the sail, but it wasn't, you had to go over the sail and the lines to get it to your requirement. And
Did you not make the sail yourself?
well, of course, the sail was made, you see.
Was it not with blankets you made it?
Well, I helped the different, the blanket, I had joined the blankets together, it was a great experience, right enough. But it's surprising, you know, what you can do if you have a certain knowledge of how to manage a boat. And I found that very, very useful. All the way until we were picked up by this other boat in the North Atlantic.
People say they saw when you were at the tiller, your lips moving all the time, and thought that you might be praying. What were you doing?
Well, that could be too. You see, I mean, you weren't idle. I mean, you were between life and death. I mean, but I was very confident when I got the sail going and running before the wind and making for Northern Ireland, which was great, you know, to be making that progress. Once you start making that progress and that, I mean, you were getting strength inwardly and outwardly, and it's really wonderful. And of course, another difficulty that we happened on the way was, of course, the wind was getting stronger, and of course, we were moving along quite fast, and of course, there's danger there as well, you see, especially with our sail. So we carried on making great miles, you know, miles and miles. I think we travelled about 300 miles, you know, from the time we were torpedoed in Western Atlantic until we were picked up again by another boat and took us into Northern Ireland. But we lost there was no lives lost, you see. There was mostly all young people. I mean, even the old ones of the crew. And we got on very well, helping one another and trying to make the best of it. So finally we were picked up off the coast of Ireland in this other boat. It's a great experience, but a good one. When you're making progress on that, and you're getting to somewhere. Well, of course, we weren't sure of where we were going, but as we travelled along, we discovered that we were making for Northern Ireland, which that was our mainstay. And of course, we were picked up there, you see, taken into Northern, well, not Northern Ireland, but it's in Ireland itself.
Did the experience of being torpedoed and wrecked under terrible circumstances, did it weaken or did it strengthen your faith?
Oh no, it didn't lessen my faith at all. It really strengthened my faith, and I had that trust through the experience that I went through, well, not shortly, a good while before this happened. A change took place in my life, and I was converted really at sea. Conversion hadn't taken place in my life before that at all, but during this time I made discoveries besides experience, which I was very glad of all that. And I was even able to sail the boat very successfully. I mean, with a full sail, and we could, with the rest, with the other, especially another two of the crew. Others were, they weren't feeling like doing it, sat there. But as long as you were doing something and getting somewhere, it gave you great courage and great strength as well. So that was my trust was there, and of course having the experience on previous experiences of the same type to not only sailing the boat, but making a great habit of getting somewhere. And of course, it's really great when you do get there. And you can be disheartened too by very little things that can happen that you. But as long as things are going well, the way you would like them to go well, it gives you great strength and confidence in what you are doing.
And you won friendships that have lasted 50 years. You won friendships that have lasted 50 years.
Oh yes, indeed, yeah. Yes, I mean, the sailing of that boat, and I have it so clear in my memory, and then what happened in that boat, that I have it, I could just go over it again in my heart and soul. And whenever I have anything to do with the boat, I'm always thinking of that passage that I took from north, yes, from the American coast, we were torpedoed in the Red Sea, and we carried on. We nearly travelled the whole of the North Sea without nothing really happened, but just having a good sail and that. But when we got quite near again, the weather was getting worse. But we didn't feel that at all, because the experience that we had of the boat and how to handle it and that, which is a great thing.
Thanks very much.
Yes,
Good, Tony. Okay.
There's one thing that you did. Remember when you've always been telling me as a little girl that when you jumped out of bed, you had been on watch the night before, and it was an awful cold night, and you had 2 pairs of trousers on.
Oh yes, that's
Remember
right.
that?
Yes.
And of course, when the ship was torpedoed, you remember what you did? You obviously had the 2 pairs of trousers on, and you were wearing them in the boat. And can you remember what you did?
Well, I can't know.
Did you not
What
give
did
a
I-
pair to someone who was sitting there with no trousers?
Oh, that's right.
Don't
yes,
remember
yes, I
that.
remember now.
Yeah.
I shouldn't miss that.
You
at
shouldn't
all.
miss that bit out at all.
Aye. He was one of my own, companions and
Yes.
that. And when he left the lifeboat, and he didn't, there was nothing but jump into the sea or get a hold of something. And now, of course, if you can swim and know what you're doing, it gives you great confidence that you can take your time and study what you're going to do and that. Otherwise, if you're not like that, you could just jump into the sea and be almost...
So when you jumped in, you had the 2 pairs of trousers on.
Sorry.
Oh,
Come on, we talk about. Remember now, you were always telling me as a little girl about the 2 pairs of trousers you had on.
yes.
Did you?
Yeah.
And when you jumped into the water, and you got yourself ready in the boat, there was some poor soul there who had no trousers
Oh,
at
that's
all.
right, yes.
You just slipped off. He probably thought you were going to strip,
Aye,
but you had another pair on underneath.
that's,
Remember that?
aye, oh, that's right. Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Yes, and quite willingly. I mean, I was an excellent swimmer, you
Yes.
see. And there's no fear of jumping into the sea in the way of swimming and that. And I knew this, it was a real dear friend.
A
of
dear
mine.
friend of yours.
Yes, I told him.
I wonder if it's one of the 3 that are sitting here today that had no trousers on.
Well,
They're not saying anything.
No, I don't think so.
And along with that, you brought with you 2 Bibles, didn't you?
Oh, well, I had that stored.
Oh, stored away. And 2 watches. You had bought watches for your brothers,
yes, that's right.
but they didn't survive,
No.
weren't they not? You had to throw them over because of the salt water.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So you had the 2 Bibles.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And after reading Peter Franklin's diary, you were quietly reading them and praying for them,
Oh yes, indeed.
and they reckon that's what got them to safety.
Well, was that their opinion?
That's their opinion.
Aye.
What's yours?
Oh well, that could be written of course. Some of these things.
So you're not putting it to your skill at all? A mixture of skill and the Lord, are you?
Oh yeah, well I'll put the Lord.
Lord first.
Oh yes, first things
Just
first.
road to listening to that.
First things first.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great experience writing of, but even coming up the Red Sea, the weather was favourably good.
Mm-hmm.
You see, you don't.
To refuse to learn to swim. The theory being that if they were going to go, they were going to go. So the fact that Angus was a strong swimmer was very unusual in those days.
Yes, that's right.
There was also the fact that because one went to sea in a large ship, it didn't mean that one had any idea at all about how to sail a small boat. So that we had this extremely fortunate position of having a Western Islander here on our ship who'd been brought up in small boats, which is a very rare sort of thing to happen. And that really was the reason why we were all in this wonderful position of being saved. Because Angus was there, calm, cool and collected, never raised his voice, always a pleasant word, sailed the ship day and night. I think it sounds a fairly old-fashioned, corny thing to say, but he sailed it at night by the feel of the wind on his cheek, which not many sailors could do. And we travelled not 300 miles, as Angus said, but 500 miles in 9 days, which I think with 2 blankets was quite an incredible feat, which I think he probably was recognised afterwards. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, that's right, yeah. And obviously we were all very grateful to him at that time, extremely grateful. We haven't said anything about the U-boat, I think.
No, we haven't talked about the U-boats. Could you tell us about that, or talk to each other about it?
Yeah, if we remember it the same way.
Well, yeah, I think the first sighting we had of the U-boat on the surface, I suppose about 3 or 4 miles away, put fear into all of us, because at that time there had been many stories about the atrocities suffered by chaps in boats just been torpedoed, being shot up, and it certainly crossed my mind. I thought, well, this is goodbye, this is curtain. And the boat came right up alongside us, and although they had chaps there with guns, and they were obviously prepared for trouble if anybody wanted to make it, there was no question at all. That was obvious right from the start that they were going to act in any way other than as seamen, fellow seamen, to us, and they acted with great kindness. In fact, they gave us tins of bread and butter and cigarettes.
Field dressings.
Yeah, dressings. They asked if we'd got a message away, and they said, well, they would try if they could to get one away. I don't think, in fact, they managed to, but they said they would do that. They gave us a course distance to the nearest land, and it was just good luck.
That's right.
And I don't think you could ask more of your enemy than that. But it was a chilly moment when they came up close, until we realised that they had got no intentions of doing anything of that kind anyway.
I think an interesting point about when we were torpedoed was that when we were torpedoed, I rushed along to the radio room as I was a radio operator, and I got there and my chief was already in the radio room sending out a distress message. But when you send out a message on radio, it's recorded on an ammeter which shows the amount of power going out, and the ammeter was stuck at dead, which meant that no transmission was going out. And I knew this, but there seemed very little point in making a remark to anybody else. It would only be depressing, so that people did think their message had got out, but no, it hadn't. Small point.
What did you have on the boat? once you had got it righted and were sailing? And what
In
happened
the
to
way
the
of
other boats?
equipment, you mean?
Food, water, equipment.
Well, there was
Oops,
Um,
sorry.
pemmican. Some of the equipment had survived the upturn, and we were able to, we'd got pemmican, which was a bit like a
Built on.
but bovril, I suppose, something like that. Not very appetizing. And there were a few biscuits, dried biscuits there.
Malted milk tablets.
Yes, malted milk tablets, which were a bit sickening. But the problem was that we had so little water. We didn't attempt to drink any water until the third day. And then we had something like, I think it was half an ounce a couple of times a day. It was...
Was it about that much, was it? Something like that? A day?
Yes.
Something like that.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Something like about
No,
that.
I would doubt whether it was even as much as that.
No,
Actually, two. I thought
Two a
it was
day was
2
about-
ounces, but twice a day.
2 ounces twice a day, was
Twice
it?
a day.
Mm.
Yeah.
But it was certainly a very small amount and not enough for the needs of a normal person. So the result was that we very quickly got so dehydrated that what food there was we couldn't eat, and you didn't want to eat it. You lost interest in eating. But when we did put out the water, every man in the boat was looking to see that what you got was your fair whack and no more, and something. And we, there was that feeling that it had to be. It was the only fair way to do it. Absolutely share and share all the way through.
I remember the first night, the 3 boats. In fact, I think we were tied to one of the boats the first night because
Right.
Angus at that time had not made the sail, and they were attempting to tow us without any success at all. And the 2 of us tied together lolloped about with the 3rd boat, I think, for the first night. And I remember seeing the anchor light, or riding light of the 3rd boat, gradually getting further and further away that first night. And I think in the morning he'd gone. And I think during the 2nd night, when we were sailing independently then because of Angus's sail, that we lost during the night the other boat. And in the morning, one was very conscious that we were just there on our own in a very grey ocean. Yeah.
It's a very lonely thought then.
Yep.
Yes, indeed. Mm.
What was the worst point of the journey? Was it? I mean, how did you feel? A, when the ship went down, and B, when you realised that you were a tiny little craft with 18 men aboard, lost in the middle of this lonely ocean.
Well,
What was the worst bit?
I think one of the points that's just been made earlier on was the fact that
Sorry,
this
gentlemen.
this boat was full of very young men. We're all young, fit. Those of us here were sort of 17, 18, 19. Angus was the old man, who was about 35, was it? But everybody else was young, full of hope and expectations, and so that there was a reasonably good spirit about things. My own thoughts, the memory is of the gale,
Yes.
which was quite horrific when if you imagine a wave 40 feet up straight above you, the next minute you're on top of it, the next minute you're down at the bottom, and you think the boat's going to sink. Which of course it doesn't, but you think it's going to. But when you're very young, you have no thoughts that anything's going to happen to you. You won't be in a boat, but you'll still be all right, which is not a very logical thought, but that's how the young perhaps think.
Well, I think on the last day or 2, certainly the last day, that we were at a pretty low ebb. And at times, I certainly was not in that boat. I was at home, and I think we were very low, much lower than perhaps we thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember seeing this corvette. Someone saying there's a ship, and we all thought it was another U-boat because all we could see was the upper works of the boat over the swell, or the ship over the swell. And then gradually, as it came nearer, we realised it was a corvette. And there was this immense feeling of relief and energy that suddenly went through all of us, as presumably the adrenaline started to flow, and
Didn't we all start to row then?
Yeah, we got
Well,
out
we'd been
all.
rowing before that, but not with that much energy or enthusiasm. But we did then. By God, we really got moving on it. It was. Yes, I think that last day or so, spirits were getting a bit low.
We all got up the scramble net, I think. I don't think anyone was...
No.
There was a scramble net put over
We
the
all got
side.
it. We all climbed ourselves.
We all climbed up this, which was, what, 10, 15 feet, I suppose, the scramble net in a heavy swell. But, I mean, as soon as you're on deck, I think one's knees gave and you just flopped down. And you were carried down below and put into a hammock, and I was taken into the sick bay with another lad. And you were just fed with... big steaming hot cups of tea, which one had been dreaming about for days, talking about, dreaming about sweet hot tea.
I can clearly remember what happened when I got on board, because I seemed to be taken on my own down to the Stoker's Mess. Well, the Stoker's Mess in the Navy is a place full of a great deal of food and drink, and they were just about to have the Stoker's dinners, and they sat me down. They're very, very kind, and put a huge Stoker's dinner in front of me. And having had no food for 9 days, bear in mind I was very young, I walloped straight through this Stoker's dinner, and they put another one in front of me, and I walloped straight through that as well. I had 2 of their pint mugs of cocoa, and then somebody lifted me into a bunk, and I don't remember anything else for 12 hours. And when I woke up, I was perfectly all right. Which is against all the medical rules.
We were landed at Londonderry after another further 4 days.
4 days. I spent most of it sitting at the table waiting for the next meal.
Yes, I can remember. I was in a hammock most of the time. Very comfortable too. Yes.
Can I come to Derek now and in the right, Tony? And
Just let me get comfortable. So it's okay, Peter. You're all right.
just hang on, just wait till this door closes and Peter's going to the loo.
All right. Okay. I'm okay now.
All right.
Changing airline. All right. Doesn't matter. Yeah.
What's your memory of the treatment you got and the immediate after effect of the experience?
Oh, they were extremely kind on the Corvette. They couldn't have done more for us. In fact, the problem was that they did too much, really, but they didn't know that they were doing the wrong thing, and that was only found out afterwards. But soon after we got on board, they cleaned us up, because we'd been covered in fuel oil, in water that was hot. It felt lovely to us, but in fact it caused problems, because all the poisons which had been accumulating in our body, we hadn't been able to pass any urine much, or none of us had been to the loo in the normal way for days, and the result was that our body was full of toxins, and this came out in sores and boils and so on, and our feet were swollen to the extent I couldn't even put I know in my case I couldn't even put a pair of slippers on, get them on my feet. That did cause problems, and I believe after reports were put in about it, they were able to issue instructions to ships generally not to do this, to let people come back up to the normal temperature. We were suffering, of course, from hypothermia. We didn't realise how cold we were at the time, but bringing a temperature up quickly caused a problem. But even the ones who suffered the most in the boat and who really were getting a bit stretched, they all survived, they all recovered. The third officer got a leg which had been injured and had gone gangrenous. Peter had done quite a lot of work bandaging that up. The bosun had got a compound fracture in his hand. Even those people all recovered. No one was died even subsequently as a result of the time in the boat. So it said something for our physical fitness, I think, if nothing else. John was saying just now that sort of dreaming about things. I can remember that we were talking about what to do with the boat when we got to Ireland, because we were convinced we were going to get to Ireland, and the suggestion was made that we would sell the boat and take all the money and go into the nearest pub in Ireland and fill up the bath with Guinness and jump in it. And I could see that bath of Guinness, and I still, even after all these years, I can't look at a Guinness or smell a Guinness or taste a Guinness without recalling exactly that experience. But and I'm not only a Guinness drinker, but it was a very, very real thing to me. Yeah. I'd just like to add my thoughts about Angus. Angus and I had been shipmates on the previous trip when he'd had this experience, which was his conversion. So I knew him in the rip-roaring days before he was the new Angus, and I'd seen him, the changed man. And his composure and his skill that he showed in the boat, without any doubts, saved the lives of all of us. No doubt. And when I found out he was still alive, a couple of years back, and we suggested that we got together down in Newbury, I think it was one of the great moments of my life to meet him again and thank him. Marvellous. Absolutely marvellous, man. Yeah.
Very good. He's such a modest body.
You're okay there, Bobby?
Yes.
Okay, so we're all
And
in.
if you talk to the other two young'uns, or you can talk to towards Angus, or to me.
You're in, Bobby, you're in.
Sorry, I'm just moving.
But it's just about the periscope and the German submarine.
Thanks very much.
Well, that morning I was working on the bridge, but not on watch, and I happened to look out and spot something which looked like a small boat way out on the horizon. I reported it to the officer of the watch, and we went and had a look, and by then there was nothing to be seen. And with hindsight, obviously what we've been looking at and what we called a quick look at was probably the conning tower or just the periscope of the submarine. But it was just a quick sighting, and that was it. And it was, I believe, John was on watch at the time, and I believe shortly after that we then altered course, and unfortunately we altered course towards the submarine, which would have made his task easier in attacking us.
Yes, we were coming up north, in fact, from La Plata. I'd been working up the Atlantic on about 900 miles off Newfoundland, and we were due to alter course to starboard, 90 degrees at midday, because I've been talking with the third mate about this, and when Derek came up and everyone went over on the starboard side of the bridge, and this thing disappeared. And in fact, about 10 minutes after that, we in fact altered course towards where Derek had made this sighting. And I think from subsequent, we've been able to get hold of the log in German, which we've had translated, of U-176. And he had been shadowing us since 5 o'clock in the morning, and to keep up with us, because we were zigzagging at about 16 and a half knots. He must have been on the surface, because our speeds, I mean the top speed of the Type 7C U-boat, which that one was about 17 knots on the surface. And he must have been having great difficulty. In fact, from the log he refers to the fact he lost us on 2 occasions for 20 minutes in rainstorms. And I think we would have got away and been quite okay if we hadn't altered course to start.